Ever stop to think about who actually checks if a company's truly, living up to those important ISO standards they claim to follow?
It's a great question.
Today, we're diving into the world of ISO auditors. Specifically, we're looking at what sets the internal eyes and ears apart from the lead or external assessors.
Right. You could sort of think of it as the difference between a company's own internal quality control team and an independent inspector coming in from the outside.
Exactly, but with these major international standards hanging in the balance.
And what's really interesting, I think, is understanding how these two quite distinct roles work together, how they ensure management systems not only meet the requirements on paper, but actually drive real improvement.
So in this deep dive, we'll clarify the roles, the responsibilities, and crucially, the qualifications needed for both internal and lead ISO auditors.
hmm And we'll be drawing on insights from key documents like ISO 19011 and also looking at the international agreements around how management system conformity is assessed. It's quite structured.
Absolutely. We want to unpack some key questions for you listening, like what fundamentally differentiates an internal auditor from a lead auditor?
Yeah, what's the core difference?
What specific qualifications does each one actually need? And maybe just as important, what's the pathway? How does someone become a qualified auditor in either role?
Okay, sounds like a plan. Where should we start? Maybe with defining the roles.
Let's do that. Let's start with the internal auditor.
Okay, so an internal ISO auditor is typically someone within the organization. Now, that could be a direct employee, or sometimes it's an external consultant hired by the company specifically for this internal role.
Okay, so they're on the company's team, essentially.
Right. And their primary focus is really examining the organization's own processes and the effectiveness of its ISO management system, but from the inside.
So the goal isn't just checking boxes.
Not at all. The ultimate goal for the internal auditor is continuous improvement. They're looking for weaknesses, opportunities, ways to make the system better.
So finding issues, suggesting improvements, making sure the whole ISO system works well day to day. And these checks, they happen pretty often.
They do. Internal audits are usually conducted at planned intervals. Could be annually, could be more often, depends on the company, its size, complexity, the standard.
Right.
But here's a really important point. An internal auditor absolutely cannot audit processes where they have direct responsibility.
Ah, okay. To keep things objective.
Exactly. It's crucial for maintaining at least some degree of impartiality, even within the internal audit. And then they report their findings, good and bad, plus recommendations, directly to the organization's management.
And management is then supposed to act on those findings.
That's the idea. Management's responsible for the corrective actions for driving those improvements identified by the internal auditor.
Got it. So the internal auditor is like the company's own improvement scout, always looking for ways to optimize from within.
That's a good way to put it.
Now, what about the lead auditor? That title sounds a bit more
Hmm.
official, external.
It definitely implies external authority, and that's correct. A lead ISO auditor, sometimes called an external auditor, is a specialist. They work for an independent certification body or maybe another external entity that provides auditing services.
Okay, so definitely not part of the company being audited.
No, completely separate. Their core job is to conduct these external audits to assess if an organization meets all the requirements of a specific ISO standard.
And based on what they find.
Based on their findings, they make really significant recommendations. They decide whether to recommend granting ISO certification, maintaining an existing one, or, in some cases, even withdrawing it.
Wow. Okay, so they hold the keys to the certification kingdom, so to speak.
In a way, yes. They're the gatekeepers.
What kinds of audits do they actually do? Is it just the first one?
Oh, no, it's arranged. They conduct the initial certification audit. That's the big one when a company first goes for it.
All right.
Then there are surveillance audits. Those are regular checkups, maybe yearly, to make sure the company is staying compliant. And then recertification audits, which happen, usually every 3 years or so when the certificate is up for renewal.
So it's an ongoing relationship, potentially.
It can be. And because they are completely independent, their objectivity is, well, it's assumed to be much higher. And unlike the internal auditor, who might be digging into process enhancements,
Yeah.
the lead auditor is primarily laser-focused on verifying overall conformity to all the requirements in that ISO standard. Full stop.
And they often lead a team, you said?
Yes, frequently they'll lead an audit team, especially for larger audits, and they're the ones making the final recommendation back to their certification body.
Okay, that really paints a clear picture of the two different worlds they operate in. Let's maybe try and nail down those key differences. The employment status and purpose seem like the big ones.
That's the core of it, really.
Yeah.
Internal auditors. Inside or hired by the company, aiming for internal improvement, risk management within their own
Love
systems.
it.
Lead auditors. External, independent, focused squarely on assessing conformity for that certification decision.
And the scope of what they actually look at during the audit, does that differ too?
It does, yeah. Internal auditors might take a broader look. They'll look at internal procedures, sure, but also how they align with the ISO standard. They might get into the weeds of how a specific department does something.
Okay.
The lead auditor, they're very specifically focused. Does the organization meet all the requirements of the standard? Yes or no? It's about full compliance verification.
You brought up impartiality before, and that feels like a really critical difference.
It is. It's fundamental. An internal auditor, just by being part of or hired by the organization, has an inherent limitation on their complete impartiality.
Even if they try to be objective.
Exactly. They're expected to be fair, of course, but their perspective can be influenced, consciously or unconsciously, by being inside. The lead auditor brings that necessary external objective viewpoint. Complete independence is key.
Makes total sense.
Yeah.
And reporting lines, where do the reports go?
Different destinations.
Mm.
Internal auditors report findings and recommendations straight to the company's own management team.
For internal action.
Right. Lead auditors, they submit their formal audit report, including that crucial certification recommendation, to the certification body they work for.
And that body makes the final call.
Yes. The certification body makes the ultimate decision.
And just to be crystal clear, the power to actually grant or withdraw that ISO certificate.
Rests solely with the lead auditor's recommendation and the final decision of the independent certification body. Internal auditors have zero authority in that certification decision itself.
Okay, this is super helpful. Maybe we could just quickly summarize those key differences, almost like a quick checklist.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's recap. Employment. Internal auditor company, employee, or consultant for the company. Lead auditor works for an external certification body.
Right.
Audit goal. Internal find issues. Improve the system's effectiveness. Lead assess conformity for certification.
Check.
Audit scope. Internal, often broader, looking at internal procedures and ISO alignment. Lead specific, focused on full ISO standard compliance. Impartiality. Internal, limited by being inside. Lead, complete independence expected.
Crucial point.
Reporting. Internal reports to company management. Lead reports to the certification body. Certification decision. Internal, none. Lead recommends the decision.
Perfect. That lays it out very clearly. But, despite all these differences, they are both called auditors. There must be some common ground, right? Shared skills or principles.
Yeah, absolutely. Big time. Despite the different hats they wear, there's a lot they share. First off, both absolutely need a deep understanding of the relevant ISO standards and the core principles of auditing.
They need to know the rules of the game.
Precisely. They have to interpret the standards requirements correctly and figure out if the company's processes actually meet them.
And ethics must play a huge role for both.
Undeniably. Integrity, objectivity, confidentiality, presenting findings fairly. These ethical principles are non-negotiable for both internal and lead auditors. Trust is the bedrock.
Right.
And, fundamentally, both conduct audits to find where things align with criteria and where they don't. The conformities and non-conformities.
Even if the end goal is different.
Even if the end goal differs, improvement versus certification both provide valuable information that can lead to system enhancement. And they use similar methods, too.
Like what?
Well, reviewing documents, interviewing people, actually watching processes happen, gathering that objective evidence. Same toolkit, different mission profile, maybe.
Okay, similar tools, different context, different aims. Now, you mentioned ISO 1911 earlier. How does that fit into all this? Is that like the master guide for auditors?
It's definitely a foundational standard. ISO 1911 provides comprehensive guidelines for auditing management systems in general. And crucially for our chat today, it outlines the competence requirements for auditors.
For both types, internal and lead.
Yes, the guidance applies broadly to those doing internal audits and those performing external audits, like lead auditors.
Yeah.
It specifies the kind of knowledge, skills, and even personal behaviors auditors need to be effective.
So it sets the baseline for what a good auditor looks like, regardless of whether they're internal or external.
That's a great way to put it. ISO 1911 really emphasizes things like having the right education, relevant work experience, understanding auditing principles and techniques, and of course, knowing the specific ISO standards they're auditing against.
And principles, too.
Yes, it lays down fundamental auditing principles.
Yeah.
Integrity, fair presentation, professional care, confidentiality, independence, which we've seen is especially critical externally,
Right.
an evidence-based approach, and increasingly a risk-based approach to auditing. These principles underpin any credible audit.
And does it get into the practicalities, like how to run an audit?
It does. It offers detailed guidance on managing audit programs, planning specific audits, conducting them effectively, reporting findings, and even following up on them. It's quite practical.
Okay, so 1911 is the big one. Are there other ISO standards that auditors, particularly lead auditors maybe, need to be aware of?
Yes, definitely. While 1911 provides the general framework, other standards add more layers. For instance, ISO-IE 17021-1. That one's specifically for the bodies that provide audit and certification of management systems.
Ah, so the certification bodies themselves.
Exactly. And within that, it details specific competency requirements for the auditors who conduct those certification audits, the lead auditors.
Okay, more specific rules for the certifiers.
Then there's ISO-IEC 1702-4, which is about the requirements for bodies that certify people. This can include programs that certify auditors for specific standards.
So getting your auditor qualification certified.
Precisely. And then if you look at the management system standards themselves, like ISO 9001 for quality, 14001 for environment, 14001 for health and safety, 201 for information security.
Yeah.
While they define the system requirements, they also include clauses requiring internal audits, and they imply that the people doing those internal audits need to be competent in that specific area.
So you need some subject matter knowledge too.
Exactly. You can't effectively audit an environmental management system, ISO 14001, without understanding environmental aspects, impacts, maybe relevant regulations. Same for quality, safety, security. You need that domain knowledge on top of the auditing skills.
So 1911 gives the how-to of auditing, but other standards might add specific what-to-know requirements depending on the field.
That's a perfect summary. The core auditing skills are transferable, but deep technical knowledge is needed for specialized audits. An InfoSec auditor needs to understand cybersecurity risks in a way a quality auditor might not, and vice versa.
It really sounds like both types of auditors are absolutely vital for the whole ISO system to work properly. How do they sort of interact in practice within a company that's going for certification?
They really play complementary roles. You can't really have one without the other being effective, ideally. The internal auditors are like the advanced team, the proactive engine.
Setting the stage.
Yeah, they constantly monitor, evaluate, find weaknesses, and help the organization fix them before the external auditors show up. A strong internal audit program makes passing the external audit much, much more likely.
So they prepare the ground.
Exactly. Then the lead auditor comes in and provides that essential independent validation, that objective check. Does this organization truly meet the standards requirements?
So that's like a cycle: internal prep, external validation.
Precisely. A cycle of internal review and external verification. That's what keeps the management system alive, effective, and compliant over the long term. Honestly, a good internal audit program is often a huge sign of an organization's real commitment.
Right. So bringing this all together then, we've really dug into the key differences between internal and lead ISO auditors. It boils down to that internal focus on improvement versus the external focus on conformity for certification.
The scope differences.
The different levels of independence, the reporting lines, and ultimately who holds the authority for that certificate.
Exactly. But it's so important to remember, despite those differences, both roles are absolutely fundamental.
Yeah.
They're both essential for the credibility, the integrity, and just the overall effectiveness of any ISO management system. They each bring something unique and necessary to the table.
So here's maybe a final thought for you, the listener, to mull over. Knowing these distinct roles and how they should complement each other, how could an organization really strategically use both its internal audits and those external certification audits?
Good question.
Not just to get the certificate on the wall, but to build a genuine, lasting culture of continuous improvement and really demonstrate credible compliance year after year. What's the potential benefit of really investing in that internal program to make the external process smoother and more meaningful?
Definitely something to think about. How to make those two processes work together in the most powerful way.
Food for thought as you navigate the sometimes complex world of ISO standards.